After all the rumor and speculation, after all the innuendo and chatter, it is now official. Cody Rhodes has returned to WWE. He was, in fact, the surprise opponent for Seth Rollins at WrestleMania 38. It wasn't Shane McMahon. It wasn't The Undertaker. It wasn't Bray Wyatt. It was, as we all expected it to be, Cody Rhodes. But it's so funny to kind of like look back at the online chatter that we've had over the last few weeks, because like Cody left AEW months ago, AEW, and he made the announcement that him and Brandy Rhodes had left. And there were people who were contacting us being like, it's a work, he'll be back at AEW, he'll be part of Ring of Honor, this, that, and the other. But the reports were, he's going back to WWE. But then he was never showing up at any of the shows, in particular that Jacksonville show. And the kind of like scuttlebutt at the time from Meltzer and Sean Ross Sapp was that he'll probably debut at WrestleMania. They'll save it until and do the big like WrestleMania debut there, the big return there. And then, yeah, it was just like almost interesting to be waning and dying off on the Cody Rhodes to WWE sort of thing. Like me and Tempest did the WrestleTalk podcast on Friday. And the chat there was like that they weren't really that bothered about Cody Rhodes now because it had almost been so long between him leaving and him going to WWE. They didn't strike while the iron was hot, so to speak. But I think the chatter about it possibly being Shane McMahon, I think the chatter of Undertaker teasing one more match, you know, and Vince inducting Taker into the Hall of Fame, Vince being the father of Shane McMahon, I think added a lot of stipulation about the hand-picked opponent by Vince McMahon did cast some doubt about whether it was going to be Cody Rhodes. Seth Rollins made his big entrance. He had a choir singing his entrance theme, and he stood in the ring and he waited there for a long time, and it was a long time, and the crowd were building up into Cody chants, and WWE did not swerve, they did not trick, they did not tease. It literally did the AEW entrance of Cody Rhodes with the wrestling has more than one royal family, or whatever it is that he says, and the Adrenaline Kingdom song. It was the full AEW entrance, including the Cody Vator. And it was quite, you know, it's interesting to see that and go back to something that Sean Ross Sapp said on Fightful a few weeks back when he was doing the Raw podcast with Denise Salcedo, where someone asked whether he would use Smoke and Mirrors or would use the Adrenaline song, and he said that when you see the story that they're doing, the entrance will make sense. And I think WrestleVotes had done the report about how there's a lot of talk within WWE of keeping Cody's entrance exactly the same as it was in AEW, because that's the key to this, isn't it? It's that this is one of the top guys of AEW, a founder of AEW, and one of its top stars has jumped ship to WWE. So keep his entrance exactly the same as it was in the other promotion. And he came out full American Nightmare. It was American Nightmare graphics. He had horrible AR for his, like, you know, his Nightmare Family tattoo. And this wasn't WWE Cody Rhodes. This wasn't Stardust. This was American Nightmare AEW Cody Rhodes. And he had an AEW Cody Rhodes match with Seth Rollins. It was dang good as well. Got really good by the end. And he won with multiple crossroads, including a tribute to his father, Dusty Rhodes, doing the flip-flop and fly. It's been reported like he's done an interview with Variety that was printed just shortly after his return, where he has called his return to WWE after 6 years the ultimate vindication. I'm just going to read a couple of quotes here. He said, "It just seems like the kind of culmination of my whole career, but I don't want to jinx it. I don't want to put any hyperbole out there, but it's the biggest crowd in wrestling. It's returning as me in something that I built and no one else built. That's the ultimate vindication." Rhodes, I'm taking this from Figure 4. Rhodes feels like he is the best wrestler in the world, and telling Variety, he said that to Vince McMahon, Nick Khan, and Bruce Pritchard. He is most excited to prove that. He says, and this is a quote, "It's a completely different individual returning to the game. It's a different brand. It's someone who's experienced all the wonders of independent wrestling, of traveling internationally, of being able to get on the ground with the fans and make this whole ship move." Later saying that his goal was to get what his father never could, without mentioning it, the WWE Championship. So Cody has got goals to be a top guy in WWE. There was an interesting thing. He was also talking about how he was sort of debunking the theories of why he left. He said, there were things about money and creative control. They were printed as fact, and it's been a very difficult 2 months to see when the reality is it was just time. It was a personal matter, and we couldn't move past it. Adding that he has respect for the Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, and is rooting for Tony Khan. This is a quote. I get an opportunity at my dream, I get another chance at it, and you really can't leave any stone unturned with that. So yeah, Cody Rhodes is now officially back with WWE. There is no more rumor or conjecture about it. He is now back with WWE, and he beat Seth Rollins at WrestleMania 38. Wasn't the match of the night. That very much went to Bianca and Becky Lynch, who had an absolute storming match for the Raw Women's Championship, which saw Bianca Belair pick up the win. Perhaps the most surprising result of the night, though, was Charlotte Flair retaining over Ronda Rousey. It was a weird match. It never felt like it should have been the semi-main event as it ended up being. And the finish saw Ronda get essentially 2 visual pins and a visual tap out on Charlotte. Or rather a visual pin and then a visual tap out on Charlotte. And then Charlotte hit her with a big boot and got the win. The finish came out of nowhere. Ronda basically no-sold the pin. And it was weird. Just really, really weird. But yeah, Charlotte Flair retained the SmackDown Women's Championship. So I guess they'll just sort of replay through. There was... Yeah, it was a bizarre little match. However, I think the biggest news that comes out of this, outside of the Cody Rhodes thing, is that Stone Cold Steve Austin, the KO show was more than just a podcast. It was the main event. And that is because it was an actual match in the end. They did a whole flipping match. So Kevin Owens brought down Steve Austin, and they had a little bit of chat back and forth about Dallas, Texas, this, that, and the other. And Steve Austin mentioned that he had his first match in Texas. Oh no, so Kevin Owens said, I had more nefarious means in bringing you down here for more than just a chat. I want to challenge you to a match, a no-holds-barred match. And Steve Austin then talked about how he had his first match in Dallas, Texas. Wouldn't it be nice if he had his last match in Dallas, Texas? If you want to see Stone Cold Steve Austin have his final match in Dallas, Texas, give me a hell yeah. Crowd went ballistic for it. And then they had a match, and it was way more than I think anyone ever thought it would be, including Stone Cold Steve Austin, his first match in 19 years, taking a suplex bump on the concrete during a crowd brawl. Insane it was. And they just brawled all over the place. They got into Stone Cold's buggy at one point and brawled up to the entrance ramp and did some suplex spots up there. It was so much fun watching Stone Cold Steve Austin have another wrestling match, a WrestleMania main event. And Kevin Owens got to have that WrestleMania main event with him, and he was having the time of his life doing all of this. It was really, really cool. Way better than it had any right to be. And Steve Austin won by hitting the stunner on Kevin Owens and getting the 1, 2, 3. Steve Austin did get hit by a stunner from Kevin Owens and got to kick out of that. And it was, yeah, just an insanely, insanely fun angle. And he did a lot of drinking of beers, and he stunned Byron Saxton afterwards for good measure, because, of course, you're going to stun Byron Saxton. It was just a really, really, really fun closing to the show. We were talking about this on the live reactions. I totally get why they didn't announce it ahead of time, because the podcast was, almost a ruse, because then it was announced, by the way, this is also going to be a match. So you got kind of no prior like hype and expectation about what it could have been. If you just said this is a wrestling match, you'd have gone into it with some conceived notions. However, because WWE's promotion of this match has been, it's the first one in 19 years, which isn't the case, in terms of Steve Austin has done lots of WrestleMania appearances in those 19 years. The build never really made much sense. But if you'd have said from the get-go, they're going to have a wrestling match, then that would have actually added up. But regardless, that is nitpicking, and it's just sort of like minor quibbles. It was a hell of a lot of fun. Just to quickly run down some of the other things that happened on the show. The 2-hour pre-show that started had nothing happen. It was just video packages and interviews. The Usos retained the SmackDown Tag Team Championships over Shinsuke Nakamura and Rick Boogs. Boogs picked up an injury during this match. They were going to do the double Samoan drop, and he just his leg gave way and he just fell to the floor. It looked like it was a worked angle, and then it realized that it was not. They announced later in the show that he has torn his quad and will require surgery. So that really sucks. Speedy recovery to Rick Boogs, of course. But yeah, it was a bit of an awkward finish, and the Usos ended up retaining. Drew McIntyre, of course, beat Happy Corbin. What else do we have? Well, this one took me by surprise. The Miz and Logan Paul beat the Mysterios. Yeah, he did, and they won clean as well, just clean as a sheet. Despite the fact that the story of this has been about cheating, they just won as clean as a sheet. Logan Paul was awesome in this match. He was really, really great. He really made a star of himself. And afterwards, The Miz turned on Logan Paul and hit the skull-crushing finale, so we'll likely be building to a Logan Paul versus Miz match down the line. And as I mentioned, Bianca Belair defeated Becky Lynch to win the Raw Women's Championship in an awesome, awesome, awesome match. Easily match of the night, potential match of the year. It was fantastic stuff. Becky looked great. Bianca looked great. Their fire was great. Their intensity was great. The in-ring action was superb. It was just, I can't say enough good things about it. And in the end, this was a lot like Mania 31. Where we went into Mania 31 being like, man, the build for this has been really rough and not been very good at all. And then the Mania itself was awesome, and we had a grand old time. And we had a fun time watching this show on the WrestleTalk podcast live reactions, and it's really hyped me up for, I mean, you might be able to hear it in my voice, and my voice is actually starting to go already. We're really looking forward to Night 2's reactions tomorrow night. I'm really, really stoked. The New Day match between New Day with Ridge Holland and Sheamus was clearly bumped from the show. They were running over time from something. Could have been Cody's entrance. It did go on for a while. So yeah, that got bumped. There's no announcement whether that's going to be on tomorrow's show or whether they're going to put that onto like SmackDown or something. But yeah, either way, that was bumped from the card. But yeah, a really, really fun WrestleMania. And Cody Rhodes is We haven't got a good Is All Elite version for WWE. BT Sport put up like a Is WWE, but it doesn't really work, but it's what we're going with. Cody Rhodes is WWE. That's what we'll go with. So Ollie will be doing a full edited review of WrestleMania Night 1, which will be going up in a few hours' time, probably about 6 hours or so from now when this video goes live. And then we'll be doing a podcast review of it over on the WrestleTalk podcast channel, so please go and subscribe to that as well. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed WrestleMania. Let me know what you thought of it in the comments down below. Jam that jam.